Hi everyone, Bart Jungens back again with a next video on HPE Morpheus VM Essentials. And in this one, I'm gonna dive deeper into the migration feature or the migration tool that was added in version 8.08. So I'll show you all the steps that are required to migrate, to move that Windows-based VM, which is running on your VMware cluster, and move it to that new HPE VM Essentials cluster based on the Linux KVM hypervisor. Now, before we dive in all those steps, first I want to show you where you can find all the information and actually the documentation where everything is nicely documented, the steps that I will show in this video. Well, keep this link in mind, hpe.com/support/VME docs. Okay, so that one will guide you to the documentation page of VM Essentials, where you can find as well the knowledge articles, where you can find the drivers and the software downloads with the 60-day trial license and so on. Now, here I'm going to focus on that software documentation. At the time of the recording, the latest version is 8.08. Over time, it will get updated to the latest version, of course. But this is as well where you can find the compatibility matrix, the release notes with all the details of what is new. Now, the steps that you need to do, you can find in the software documentation. You will see later on that the migration tool that was added in version 8.08 is part of the tools. So you have to go to the tools section and then migration. And in here, one important page that I'm not going to read all the bullet points, but quite important here is, first of all, those migration requirements. There are a few things that you need to be aware of when you're migrating a Windows VM up to a Linux KVM hypervisor. Definitely, if you are upgrading from an older version to a newer version, like in my case, you got to be sure that you also update the agent, the VME agent, on each host in your cluster as well to the latest version. And there are some other steps as well regarding the VirtIO drivers, because that's the most important thing that you need to be aware of when moving that VMware based VM towards a Linux KVM based hypervisor, is that you have those VirtIO drivers injected before the migration into the Windows-based VM. Now, before I'm going to tell you about the migration plan, because here the migration plan is nicely documented, and so this is what we're going to do in this video. This is really the easy part, but I want to show you this important one, configuring Windows workloads for migration, because there are a few steps that you need to do before actually starting that migration. So while that Windows VM is still running in VMware, there are a few steps that you need to do, which is actually injecting those VirtIO drivers. And this is the reason I want to show this to you with this video. So let's get started. So first I'm going to show you my current VM Essentials environment. When you took a look at my previous video, you will recognize a lot. So I get started with, I have a few instances here. So I have some demo Linux and Windows VMs. There is no migrated VM yet in here. So that's what we're going to work on now. And when I go to my clouds in my infrastructure, you will see that I have a VME cloud with my 2 hosts, and I've also a VMware cloud, which is a connection to my vCenter. How you want to do that, or the steps that you need to do, I have another video as well in my VME playlist to see how easy it is to connect your VME manager towards your existing vCenter environment. And so when I go into my VMware cloud and I go to my VMs, well, you will see that I created here that migrate me VM. So it's a Windows-based migrate me VM that you will find under vCenter, and at this right moment, this VM is discovered. So you see that little hand icon. It's in a discovered state. It's not yet managed by VME Manager. So this is part of all the steps that you will see in a few minutes in this video. But before that migrate me VM will appear on my VM Essentials cluster, well, I'm gonna follow the steps from the documentation website that I just showed you, because there are a few preparation steps that you need to do while that VM is still running on VMware. So I switched to my VMware vCenter console, where you can find the migrate me VM that I created specifically to showcase this migration. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna connect to my console and log in to my VM so that I can perform all the prerequisite steps, which is nicely documented on the documentation pages. So the first thing that I need to do is inject the VirtIO drivers. How can I do that? Well, I have to go to settings. I'm gonna boot this machine into recovery mode. So I go to settings, update and security, recovery, and then click restart now. I'm gonna select my keyboard and then hit troubleshoot, and I'm gonna get into the command prompt. The first command that you need to run in this command prompt is diskpart, and then the command list disk. Now, if there are no disks shown, like this is the case now, that means that that driver is not active yet. How can we do that? So if this is not the case, that moment, what do we need to do? Well, we're gonna mount the VMware tools ISO image. So I go back to my VMware console, I select my VM and say install VMware tools on my VM. At that moment, what I can do is run the following command. So I'm gonna exit this part and I'm gonna load that storage driver that will enable me to see those hard disks. The complete command line is nicely documented in the documentation pages. So at this moment now, my driver is successfully loaded. And at that moment, if I go into diskpart again, and I run that command list disk, well, now you will see that my 20 gigabit boot drive of my Windows server is effectively available. So that's good. The next command that you can or should run now is list volume. At this moment, you will see volume 0, which is the D drive, being that ISO image that is mounted. But volume 1 is now my 1920 gigabit NTFS partition where my Windows is installed on. Now, however, you might notice that there is no C drive ladder assigned to that volume. So what can we do? There is a command select volume 1, and now we can say assign a ladder equals C. And so if I'm gonna run that command list of volume again, now you will see that to volume 1, indeed the drive letter C is okay. At this moment, I'm okay. I can exit disk part and I can unmount the VMware tools installer, because the next thing that I need to do after that I mounted the drives is now inject the VirtIO drivers. So what I will do is now, first of all, on my VM, I will unmount the VMware tools installer. My CD drive gets disconnected, and at that moment I can connect now another ISO image, which is, by the way, on my SimpliVity data store. I uploaded in advance the VirtIO Windows image, which you can download from the internet. The link, by the way, is documented in the documentation pages of the migration guide. So I have that VirtIO ISO image on my data store somewhere, and now I'm gonna mount it to my VM. At that moment, what I can do is I can run a dir directory list on my ISO image, and now you will see indeed that there are multiple VirtIO files and directories that are available on my D drive, which I can use now to inject the VirtIO drivers. Now, important here is that at this moment when I'm making this video, the documentation pages needs to be updated, but that should be a matter of hours or days, so I assume that will be okay when you are following these steps. But there are two drivers that need to be added. At this moment it mentions only one driver, but I can tell you, if you want your migration to work, then you need to inject those two drivers, and that's what I'm gonna show you here. Kudos to my good VME fellows, Arnoud and Dean, for helping together in the community to be sure that everything is working fine. Kudos to those guys. So I'm gonna enter now the two drivers by using the DISM tool to inject those two VirtIO drivers. So this complete syntax comment is directly from the documentation pages to inject first the viostore.inf driver. Let's see that that works. Yes, the operation completed successfully. The second one that needs to be done is the SCSI driver. So I'm gonna change that comment quickly to SCSI, and so also this second driver needs to be injected. And also there I get an operation completed successfully. Well, guys, that's it. At this moment I am okay. Drivers are injected in this Windows image, and now I can continue with booting back again my Windows VM and then get ready to start the actual migration. Now, before I do that, I need to be sure that as well all the other drivers are also installed and that the guest tools are installed as well. Now, the ISO image of the VirtIO drivers is still connected, as you can see here, which is easy, because what do we need to do now? Well, first of all, the VirtIO WinGT X64, and then afterwards the guest tools needs to be installed. So let's do that quickly. It's just a next finish installation. First of all, we do the drivers, and then secondly, the guest tools, which is also install and then finish. Well, at that moment, all the prerequisites are done. So we prepared the OS and we injected the VirtIO drivers. At this moment, I can disconnect my ISO image as well from that VM. And what I can do to be sure that everything is active and consistent, is shut down the VM, and then we can move towards the VME environment and get the migration started. So I am back in my VM Essentials dashboard. And so since version 8.08, under the tools menu, you will find that migrations option. So when I go into the migrations, I can create a so-called migration plan. I'm gonna call it Migrate Me, right? My source is the VMware cloud. The target is my VME cloud with the resource pool and the group that I created in my environment. Then I get a list of all my VMs. And here is that Migrate Me VM that we just prepared. So I'm gonna hit select. Now I'm gonna select just one, but as you can see, I can select multiple VMs at the same time in one migration plan. You can migrate multiple VMs if you would like. There are a few questions, for instance, the networking, because I'm using the VM network in VMware. Now I've got to select which target network that I will be using inside VME. I'm going to use my compute network for that. And also for the storage, this is my Simplicity data store. Well, now I'm going to select my data store inside the VME environment. Now, if you watched one of my other videos, you might have seen that I have an Alletra MP. I'm using the Alletra MP plugin, a little bit like the vVols concept. And so I'm going to show you how it nicely works together. So I'm going to use Alletra MP as a target. So this migration will then automatically create a volume on my Alletra MP specifically for this VM. And at that moment, I might add here administrator and password for afterwards if you want to do automation steps eventually afterwards. Always nice. Or if you want to install the agent, the Morpheus agent afterwards, not mandatory. I click next. I verify everything in here, and now I hit complete. At this moment, you see that I created a migration plan with the source, the destination, and the history. There's nothing in the history yet because it's in a pending state. It's not running yet. If I want to start this Migrate Me migration plan, I have to hit the run button, of course. Are you sure? Yes, let's go for it. So what I can do now is, you see the in progress 1, and then I can hit the history tab and I can follow now all the steps with the pre-checks, the preparation of the source and the creation of the target. Once that the target VM is created, then the longest part of this migration will be the actual transferring of the data. There you go. Goes quite quickly. Transfer of the data starts now. By the way, you can follow as well the progress inside VMware vCenter, because technically what happens is this Migrate Me VM. If you didn't shut down the VM, it will shut down the VM for you, and at that moment it will create an OVF template. So in the backend, you can see directly if the migration is working or not, because you can see here that export OVF template that happens. And so at this moment now, the transferring of the data from VMware towards VM Essentials is effectively happening. And so now we have to wait until this finishes at 100%. So once that the export arrives at 100%, you will see as well that the history tab is also continued towards 100%, and it looks like that migration is successfully completed. And it says ready. Well, now, of course, how can we validate that? Well, quite easy, by going to provisioning and instances. And now you will see here the migrate me VM, which was running first on VMware, is now an HVM migrate me VM. And when I click on it, you see now that it's finalizing the deployment and the configuration. So also now here, I can follow the final steps in the provisioning and the finalization of this VM, and then it will get powered on my VM Essentials environment. So let's wait just a little bit longer to finish the provisioning and configuration and validate the successful migration. Okay, so the progress bar is gone. When I take a look at the history, the provisioning is completely finished. You can always validate all the steps that are running. So which means that now I have my VM running. And when I go to the console, you will see that here is my Windows VM, and I am able to log on. Now, this VMware tools error is normal because we didn't remove VMware tools. Maybe this is one best practice before you start the migration. To remove VMware tools, so I have to go now to add remove programs and remove them afterwards. What I can validate as well is that I have networking. Yes, my network interface is active. So that means that all the drivers, storage, but also the network card drivers are perfectly working. Sweet. So I hope this gives you a good idea of how you can migrate a Windows-based VM from VMware towards my VM Essentials cluster. Stay tuned for more videos. Bye-bye.